Hey everyone, Shaun Stevenson here, author of the Throne series, and I have been in an Indiana Jones kind of mood. I read an Indiana Jones book recently, and then I was thinking about Indiana Jones, and I was watching footage of the Disneyland ride, Indiana Jones and the Forbidden Temple, which if you have not ever been to Disneyland to ride that ride, it is my favorite ride at Disneyland. I love it. It's so much fun. And so I was kind of like in this Indiana Jones mood, and I was thinking about what do I want to read? And recently I found a book called The Drakensberg Adventure by Lloyd Alexander when I was in Iowa at a bookstore. And so I was looking at this book and I thought, what is this series? And it ended up being book number 3 in the Vesper Holly series, which is kind of like a girl Indiana Jones. So I was like, I want to read these books. They look so interesting, but I do not want to start with book 3. I want to go back to book 1. So I may or may not have gotten them all. And I read book number 1, The Illyrian Adventure by Lloyd Alexander. And I had so much fun reading this book. Now, this series is definitely, it comes on the like heels of Indiana Jones kind of stuff. It came out in the 80s, and this series is very much another Indiana Jones sort of storyline. There were actually a lot of different authors who tried to do things with Indiana Jones type stories in the 80s and 90s, where there's a character who goes on adventures all around the world looking for different artifacts, trying to solve puzzles and clues and all those sorts of things. And I feel like, I will just say this as my Indiana Jones aside, and even for the Indiana Jones stories that I think don't work, I think what often people have missed about Indiana Jones is there always has to be this element of the supernatural in stories about Indiana Jones in order to make them just fly. Because I think it's no argument that Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade are the 2 very best Indiana Jones stories that we have. I will also say, though, there are some of the Indiana Jones books that are the prequel series that are for adults that have some pretty good storylines, but they sometimes miss that hint of the supernatural. They make it too vague, or they make it, oh, it's not really supernatural. It was never supernatural at all. And I think that's always the miss. Also, whenever Indiana Jones decides to do something with aliens, mistake. Just gonna throw it out there. So where does the Illyrian Adventure and Vesper Holly fall on the scale? So in the Illyrian Adventure, you have this girl named Vesper Holly, and her parents have died. And so this longtime friend of Vesper Holly's parents comes to stay with her and kind of be like her guardian until she's old enough to be on her own. And this is Uncle Brinton and his wife, Mary. Now, Brinton goes by Brinny, or at least to Vesper Holly, or Professor Garrett. His name is Brinton Garrett, and he's a professor. And so, which is very helpful in the Indiana Jones style of things. And this book series is set kind of around that 1900s, 1920s kind of time period where there are some vehicles and things, but not all over the place yet. So we're kind of in that time period. It's never really said exactly what time period this is set in, but you're in that 1900s, 1920s kind of range. And Vesper Holly believes that there is a very interesting treasure that awaits them on the island country of Illyria. Vesper Holly really wants to go there because her father had this theory that back a long time ago, there were these legends about this King Vartan who sent some sort of a magical army to fight against the invaders who had come to the island. And the father believed that those magical army soldiers maybe were more real than legend. And Vesper Holly is setting out to go figure out what is the truth. So her and Brinny, Professor Garrett, go to Illyria to try and solve this and end up in the middle of a civil war. They're trying to find their way through all these different things that are happening in the country, as well as solving these clues to lead them to this magical army, which may or may not tip the balance of power in the country. So you've got all the great pieces for this. Like, it's set up so well. You have clues, you have puzzles, you have all the different sorts of characters you want in this kind of a story. You have the people who are in the Civil War, and you see it from both sides, and I think it's really well done in that kind of sense. But the most interesting, weird choice that Lloyd Alexander made, and we're going to get to Lloyd Alexander here in a minute as the author, but the weird choice that he made to tell this story is to put it in Brynny's perspective. This story is told in first person from Brynny's perspective, and at first I kind of was a little disappointed by that. I thought, oh, I sort of wanted this from Vesper Holly's perspective. Like, I feel like that would have been the better character to put this series under than the professor who's like her guardian. But okay, but weirdly, it worked. I can't really explain why. It just kind of worked because Brynny is able to tell the story in a really funny way. And there's all the action and all the different things that are going, and it is fast paced. This book is not going to sit there and just chew scenery or kind of like, oh, we're going to describe what's happening around this countryside for 5 million pages. Like, things move along. It's not that long of a book. It's like 120-ish pages. And things move along. And I really liked that about the story. And I got to like Brynny as a character quite a bit. But I do feel like it's a bit of a bait and switch to call this series the Vesper Holly series, but have the main character voice be the uncle. I just felt like it was a little odd. Now, Lloyd Alexander, let's talk about him. He is the author of the Chronicles of Prydain, which is one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. I love that series so much. It is so well done. If you are wondering what the Chronicles of Prydain is, there was a Disney movie in the 80s called The Black Cauldron, which is one of my favorite Disney movies. I think a lot of people really like that movie, actually. And The Black Cauldron was based on the first 2 books in the Chronicles of Prydain, the Book of Three and The Black Cauldron. And that movie was kind of a mashup of those 2 books, like some of the ideas in both of them put together in that movie. And Lloyd Alexander is a really great storyteller. And I think that strength is carried over here. He is just such a good storyteller. He has pacing down so well, but never makes you feel cheated on description of setting or the character plot or anything like that. He gets things moving along and you feel so immersed in what feels like a really grounded world. And I will say, the mystery here is well done. I thought it was pretty fun, and you can't really guess the ending of what's going on with this magical army. And I thought that was genius. It was so well done. There's also some, I will say, unfortunately, there are some plot twists that are kind of obvious that you can kind of like see from the very beginning, especially if you've ever read any sort of fantasy story or adventure story. You're going to be like, I wonder who the villain is. Obviously, because it's been done a million times since this book. But this book, you shouldn't sleep on it. Even if you think, oh, well, I don't know how that sounds. If you're into adventure kind of stories, Indiana Jones type stories, this is really well done. And I will say, because I'm sure someone's probably wondering, girl Indiana Jones, really? Do we need that? Here's the thing. Vesper Holly never feels like an Indiana Jones ripoff. She is definitely her own character. She is very different from Indiana Jones. And she is not a Mary Sue. A Mary Sue is a character in a story who can do anything, never messes up, always does everything perfectly the first time they try it. And Vesper Holly, she messes up quite often. And she has a lot of confidence, but that gets her into trouble quite a bit. And so I thought that actually it was pretty well done from that perspective. Like I said, the mystery is pretty good. You have a great adventure. There are some great set pieces and locations and action scenes throughout the book. And there's some intense moments that I thought, I legit don't know how they're getting out of this. Like, I don't know what they're going to do to get out of that situation. And the ways that Lloyd Alexander gets them out of the situations are organic, they're great, they are very well done, and I loved it. Now, I also do have to say, this book is a product of its time. It is a product of the 1980s, and so there's some interesting characterizations of some different characters that I thought, that's a little interesting. I don't know what to think about that. But I also will say it's a product of its time. So just go into it knowing that ahead of time, and I think you're going to be okay. So at the end of the day, how many stars do I give The Illyrian Adventure? So I would have to give The Illyrian Adventure 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked this book a lot. I think, like I said, it was a little disappointing it wasn't from Vesper Holly's perspective. I think that would have bumped this up to a 5. And because there's some obvious plot twists here and there that you can kind of see coming. But otherwise, this is a fun adventure story. If you like Indiana Jones, National Treasure, any of those sorts of stories where you're solving clues and puzzles and trying to figure out what is going on and where the treasure is, then you're going to like this book. So definitely check this one out. It is not too hard to find, actually. A couple of the books can get pricey here and there, but if you're okay with different editions of the books, they're pretty easy to find. So definitely check this out. I think it's a great series so far. I cannot wait to read book 2 and see what happens next. So until next time, everybody, keep reading. Bye.